everything is just trial and error, right?
Everything trial and error.
There was no foundation for how to go about getting this degree and using it properly, how to go about finding a mate that's going to, that's a relationship that's going to last.
Right.
It's just kind of a program like, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do it in this order, and then that's it. And then 8 years down the line, you're divorced, you aren't using your degree, all of these things that can happen.
Yeah.
So I think that jades a lot of people, right? Like seeing that just makes people jaded.
But it would, because they're taking the wrong approach.
Mm-hmm.
When you go to college, now I understand this idea about prioritizing. Women have a narrow window, I call it a narrow window of time, to have children, to have healthy children, and also to help to rear them in a proper and appropriate way, especially in an environment like we're in.
Mm-hmm.
The environments we're in, where it requires special attention and special learning and special education. Now, I'm saying that from my vantage point, but the vast majority of Black people here, there, in Europe, they don't give their children this type of education. So they don't have these type of concerns. But when I say the narrow window, I do believe it's true that a female should focus and should prioritize raising up a family. I do agree with that. But there's nothing that stops them from having a degree before they turn their attention to that.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way you get both.
Yeah. The window is big enough.
The window's big enough to have both.
And, have a child.
Right. And there's also something that I heard a lot, is popular now, and being a person who's married to a lawyer, is a lawyer, and has 4 children, and having my wife sometimes be home and taking care of those children and not going out to the law firms or whatnot. One of the things that's you can easily fall into, one of the traps, people think they want a woman who is dependent on them, a woman who is kept, a woman who relies on you and sees your masculinity and lets you lead. They think they want that. But the reality of the reality is, no one wants to drag dead weight. It gets very old very quick when you're with an adult.
Let me stop you there, because I need you to explain that. What do you mean by dragging dead weight?
Meaning,
I think I know what you mean. I just want you to explain it for the people.
All right. Meaning everybody has potential. If you as a man look at a woman and you can only see her figure, her physical attractiveness, there's no potential in her beyond that. The ability to cook a meal, breastfeed a child, have spectacular sex. That's not a purpose. It tires, it gets old. You have to find somebody with potential, with some rootedness. And when you find that, when you care for somebody, the most important thing, a way of showing love, is actually to keep pushing them toward achieving the highest potential. And when you're doing that and they aren't moving, it gets old quick. It's like dead weight. It's like carrying around a rucksack. You have to be in these circumstances to realize this, right? People, our homes, our communities, everything is better off when we're all functioning to our maximum. When we're not hamstrung by things, we're not got identity problems and insecurities, and we're not being controlled and dominated and the rest of it. The ideology that says a woman should come home and be beholden to me kills me. Because now I have to take care of myself, plus her, who she's an adult, and the children. It's a weight that the majority of our men.
But you get a meal out of it. But you get a meal.
A meal.
Right.
You see? So the price that we're willing to pay for some things that make no sense. It's a high price to pay. When you're living with a person that you rendered a child, you've left them in childhood. The ambitions don't matter. The girls don't matter. The job is simply to be beholden to me. That's not it. I understand this priorities thing about having a family. I understand it. I also understand this idea of masculinity and femininity. I understand it. But my thinking does not say that masculinity and femininity requires the subservience of one's ambitions to another person. Adults should be autonomous. Adults should maximize the potential. Adults can do a lot more than they're currently doing. Right? And when you see that potential in somebody and you start to push them toward their potential, to maximize it, to achieve their goals, right?
Yeah.
And you say, use the skills that you have to do beneficial work for our household and our wider community. That's the best way to sustain a relationship, because the foundation and the purpose is already set.
Yeah.
When one person has a purpose and the other person does not, it's old, it's tedious, it's dry, it's divorce territory.
Yeah.
It's relationship breakdown territory.
Yeah. And you know, I believe in some traditional gender roles, things like that. So I don't want anyone to be confused about this conversation, because I know exactly what you're saying. It's not to say that women and men still may not have roles within their relationship that they play, right? But it's to say that both people need to be building together for something greater than, okay, the woman is doing this and the man is going to work, and that's just what we're going to do for the rest of our lives. Because we have to think of it on a broader scale. Like when we get back to the conversation about the Black community specifically,
right?
We were talking about wealth gaps earlier. There are not many Black families that can even afford to have multiple kids and one person working. So when I hear people talking about, you know, women shouldn't really focus on school as much, men should be the ones going into these STEM fields, get a high paying job, get a good woman, get married, have kids. Okay, but like that's very much not the case for the majority of Black families. It's just, in reality, most Black men are not making $200,000 a year or 300,000, you know, whatever the number is that people look for. So how important do you think it is for women in that aspect, just in the financial aspect, to look at education in a specific type of way? And what's the difference between how men and women should view it from that lens, from the starting a family lens, from the financial, you know, security lens?
I think that before anybody starts talking about males and females, men and women, they should focus on child and adult. There are adults and there are children, right? And I'm saying a lot of us are still children pretending to be adults. We haven't got the type of education that moves us into adulthood. In the old past way, say Nigeria. Your parents from there?
Yeah, my dad.
All right. So say Nigeria, indigenous way of thinking about things. You would separate out boys and girls, males and females, children, and you would give them a rites of passage, mainly prioritizing teaching them the skills of adulthood.
Yes.
Adulthood, meaning I'm going to prepare you to be somebody's spouse, somebody's parent, and somebody's functionary in this community.
Yes.
When you have that background, then you can start talking about, now these are the particularities of adulthood as a man and the particularities of adulthood as a woman.
Yes.
But you don't get to that stage unless you're an adult first.
Yes.
And in Nigeria and other parts of the African indigenous way of thinking about these things, they wouldn't even tell you as a child what those particularities were, because you were not entitled to know them until you was an adult. So I think it's very important for us. Sometimes we jump ahead of ourselves. I hear a lot of conversations where we talk about man and female, and we talk about 15-year-olds and 16-year-olds, and then we talk about 20-year-olds the same way. But we haven't had no conversation about the distinction between a person who's an adolescent, and a person who has the responsibilities of adulthood. Now, I've said all of that because it kind of answers the question. If you understand that adulthood is the real distinction, not male and female. All adults should approach adulthood the same way. They have certain responsibilities.
So you mentioned rites of passage, and one time I was on the Lapeef panel, and someone asked if I believed in rites of passage. Excuse me. The thing is, though, in America, there aren't really like set rites of passage the same as there are in other countries. Let me put it that way. There aren't those things where it's like, okay, now you're becoming a man, or now you're becoming a woman, and this is the ceremony, and this is what this means. It's kind of just an age. So, okay, well, now I'm 18, so I'm a man. Or now I'm 18, I'm a woman. Now I've had a child, I'm a woman. Now I've gotten somebody pregnant, I'm a man. So just as a Black community, what will be our substitute for that? Since there are no like distinct rites of passage in terms of our community at large.
There are no substitutes for it. And the sooner we understand that our ancestors, our community has specific social technology that allows us to grow in the right way and to run our communities in the right way, and we take the responsibility of reconstituting those things, you will have the same outcomes. Because those things, that technology I talk about, is largely about how a community is to run as Black people.
Yeah.
What type of things actually make us Black people as opposed to just people, right? Just a minority, or just a colored. No, so there is no substitute. It's the responsibility of adults in the wider collective to reconstitute rites of passage and the transitions of life. Is no other choice. You can't say, what is it? I heard you. What is it that we can do instead? There is no instead.
So it has to happen. We have to come up with, how does that happen though? How do you come up with these things? How do you get people on the same page to agree? Is it more so that, you just start with yourself, start with your family, then maybe your kids will do it. It can become like something within your family and then spread that way. Or what do you think is the best, I guess, approach? Because I think rites of passage are important just to kind of have people on the same wavelength when we're going from childhood to adulthood, before we even start thinking about getting into a marriage, or going to college. You just need to have certain things in place so that you can be successful.
Right. I think you're talking about is a real problem. The rites of passage, a formalized social, community-wide rites of passage, cultural rites of passage, does not exist here either. At most, there's individual families who feel connected to their ancestry and therefore start to institute these things on their own. But we, as a community, we must believe in rites of passage, because one rite of passage is marriage. And it's being promoted up and down every country. So obviously some transition from unmarried to married is accepted. Now, what if we say it as a community? You can't have that rites of passage. You can't go transition from unmarried to married unless you first transition from child to adult.
Right. And what does that look like?
Right. It's, we've got to reverse engineer ourselves, which is a strength, by the way, because no other people is in this position.
Right.
It's a benefit to us to look at our situation afresh and re-engineer ourselves from the ground up using the wisdom that we hear from the past. So I think you do have to start household to household, or better yet, lineage to lineage. This is language that people are not familiar with. And whenever I use it, sometimes people roll on and say, "What are you talking about, a lineage or extended family or whatever?" I don't believe, for instance, in the nuclear family. I don't believe it's a social construct that has anything to do with us. And when I say that, people say, "Oh, this is outrageous." It's the bedrock of a good community. It's not. Because
so what do you think is? How do you view that?
Well, I say it this. I think it's dangerous to build your community around consenting sexual partners, because attractiveness and romance and sex are weak links. So many communities fail when those relationships fall apart. So I like you today, and because I'm not connected to you by blood, I can dismiss you. And when I dismiss you, it leads to social upheavals. So our ancestors would have said, no, we wouldn't accept that. The most important social construct, or the most important grouping, is your kin group. It's who you're related to. With what? Who comes from this womb? Right? We prioritize children and siblings and uncles and aunts and parents, and not sexual partners. Right? The sexual partner is the add-on. You get with them so you can have children.
Yeah.
And, right? But you don't get with them to create a family, because you already have one. And it's a bigger unit than a household. The households are weak. They're subject to being undermined too easily. If I get in an argument and it's a bitter one, or somebody does the wrong thing, or I get tired of you, I leave. And I throw our community into turmoil. But if I'm part of a group where that can happen, but I can't leave, I'm still part of the grouping, there's more solidity. And from that solidified group, that kinship group, then you start to institute the cultural reforms that we need for rites of passage, the transitions, the return to our even spiritual roots, because it's very important, right?
Yeah, because then things aren't as disjointed, because it's not just like a family is here, a family is there, a family is there. It's more of a cohesive unit.
Right. It's more of a cohesive unit. So it's hard to get our brains in a certain gear to see that there are other ways of organizing societies, and that we have the answers already. We just need the willpower to do it, because we're so committed to Western society, so committed to the wider network that we're in, we don't see ourselves as a distinct and separate group. If we saw ourselves as a distinct and separate group, I don't have to concern myself with the disparity between this group and that other group. I'm only going to be concerned about maximizing the potential of this group.
And then this group will grow, and this group will thrive better.
What does it need? What does this group need in particular? I'm not looking at Bill Gates. I'm not looking at this relationship and whether they're getting a divorce. I don't care. I'm not Bill Gates. Right? I look at this group. What does this group need? What's happening in the community, in the household, in this group? What's happening with the children in this group? Right? And how do we strategize ways to improve our condition in this group? That's important. So you hear a lot of people talk about stand on your square, 10 toes down, walk in purpose. But then you ask them, what's the purpose that you're talking about?
Yeah, what is
they don't have a clue.
Get a high-paying job, get a husband or a wife, right?
And that's not a purpose. That's not a purpose. That's the method that you fulfill the purpose.
Yeah, because the purpose is much bigger. And I think that a lot of times, a lot of us don't really think far enough into the future. You know, we don't think about 100 years from now. We don't think about 50 years from now. We think about, you know, what's going on today. You know, who am I going to marry today? You know, whenever. And honestly, I feel like that mindset comes from a place of us as a Black community being in constant survival mode all the time.
All the time.
All the time. It's just, oh, what do I need to do so that right now these people in front of me will be good, right? It's kind of a luxury to think about the future. A luxury that a lot of people it has almost been conditioned out of a lot of people. You know, I don't, and I'm not saying it doesn't happen just because I don't hear it a lot, but I don't hear a lot of people talking about their grandkids and their great grandkids and the people that are going to be way down the line of their family. It's more so their nuclear family in their
Yes.
house, which
Yes.
of course is very important. But if we're looking to make long-term strides, like as a community, if we're looking to build something that's going to be better with each generation, and I'm not saying there have not been achievements, there have, but if we're looking for that foundation that you're talking about, where we have these rites of passage, where we have these cultural norms, things that we follow, so that we are prepared when it's time to go to college, so that we are prepared when it's time to look for a mate. Without those things, like all this disjointed activity, what's going to happen to our community?
It leads to barren arguments, you see. When you don't have a wider purpose and you're not doing the type of things I'm talking about or we're talking about, you get trapped in discussions about the minuscule.
Yeah.
So now my discussion is about whether or not my woman made me the right type of meal. No, my discussion is limited to whether or not I'm leading. When in reality, Black people don't lead anything in the Western world.
Please tell me what you think about that leadership conversation and the conversation about like women submitting and things like that.
It's not like we're away from talking about education, but we're not, because this is the type of education that is rooted in cultural education, right?
Yeah.
I say it, look, adults don't submit to other adults. Adults don't submit to other adults.